A very warm welcome to you, dear students, once again to the history class. In the last chapter, we have learned how society changed due to the effects of the French Revolution. You all know that a revolution is a change. It can be a political change, a social change, or a change in the economic sphere. Now, we will move on to the second topic in history, socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. In this chapter, we will begin with Unit 1, the age of a social change. You all know that in the French Revolution, we spoke about freedom and equality. Before France could get freedom and equality, the social and economic power in France was controlled by the aristocracy and the church. Aristocracy means the nobles or the people of the noble families, and the church means the priest and all the other religious. Soon after the French Revolution, ideas about individual rights and who controlled social power began to be discussed. When people realized that they can put an end to the rule of the king, they began thinking about having power in their own hands. Even in countries like India, Rajaram Mohan Roy and Derizio spoke about the French Revolution in how it could take place and in India. Soon after the French Revolution, in Europe, there were three groups that came up. One was the conservative group, the second was the liberal group, and the third was the radical group. The ideas of all these three groups differed from each other. These three groups came up in Europe at this time. Let us now talk about the liberals. The liberals wanted a nation that tolerated all religions. Tolerated all religions means they would accept people of any religion and they would allow people to practice their own religion. They opposed dynastic rulers. Dynastic rulers means they opposed the rule of the king. They wanted a representative, elected parliamentary form of government like the type we have today in India. They also wanted that laws should be introduced by a well-trained judiciary. That means the laws that are implemented in the country should come from a judiciary. One of the drawbacks of this liberal group was that they did not practice universal adult franchise. Universal adult franchise means they didn't give all adults the right to vote. They only gave men who had property the right to vote. Women were not allowed to vote at all. Now let us move on to see who the radicals were. The radicals wanted a government that was based on the majority of country's population. They thought that whomever the people of the country want, that kind of a government would be tolerated in the nation. Radicals felt that women should be given the right to vote. They were against the rich being given special privileges, means that they did not like the rich people being given special treatment. They were not against the idea of people owning private property, but they were against the idea of property being in the hands of a few people. They felt that properties should be equally divided among all the people. Let us move on now to see who the conservatives were. The conservatives were a form of people who were different from the liberals and the radicals. They had opened their minds to a change. They felt that a change must take place in society, but the past had to be preserved. They felt that everything in society shouldn't be wiped off. Some things that are good should be preserved. They believed in a change, but the change had to be brought about through a slow process. The views of all three groups clashed regarding the social change. Dear students, last time we spoke about the liberals, the conservatives, and the radicals in Europe. People in Europe were very much attracted to the ideas of the liberals and the radicals. So they gathered around these people to follow them. Besides these, the socialists in Europe were also gaining a lot of importance. The socialists were against the ownership of private property and saw it as the root of all social evils or problems. Socialists wanted a society in which the property was in the hands of many and not in the hands of a few people. So, the socialists formed an international body to achieve these goals. This international body formed by the socialists was known as the Second International. As the struggle for socialism continued in many parts of Europe, in places like England and Germany, associations were formed to fight for better living and working conditions. These associations that were formed in England and Germany during this time demanded a reduction in the working hours. That means they wanted that the hours of work should be reduced, and they also demanded for the right to vote, as all the people in Europe during this time did not have the right to vote. As the struggle for socialism continued in Europe, the socialists took over the government in Russia through the October Revolution of 1917 that took place in Russia. This revolution that took place in Russia happened because the people of Russia were not happy with the rule of the Tsar. The Tsar was the king of Russia. In Russia, the king was known as the Tsar. Now, this revolution that began in Russia to fight against the Tsar came to be known as the Russian Revolution. the people of Russia revolted against the Tsar. The Tsar during this time was Tsar Nicholas II. Before the Russian Revolution, the Empire of Russia under Tsar Nicholas II was a very vast empire. Vast means it was a very big empire. And there were a number of places that were under the Russian ruler. Some of the places that were under the Tsar of Russia before the revolution were present-day Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. The empire also stretched to the Pacific and comprised today's Central Asian states as well as Georgia,
Armenia,
America, and Azerbaijan. Before the Russian Revolution, the people of Russia practiced Orthodox Christianity. Besides the Orthodox Christians, there were people of many other religions in Russia. The other religions that were practiced in Russia during this time were Christianity, Protestantism, Islam, and Buddhism. The population of Russia before the revolution was vast, and most of the people in Russia during this time practiced agriculture. Since agriculture was the most or the main occupation of the people of Russia, most of the people in Russia exported grain, as a result of which Russia became the major exporter of grain. Some people of Russia also worked in the factories that were there in Russia. Russia during this time had a very few factories. Industries in Russia during this time were found in St. Petersburg and at Moscow. Slowly, the industries in Russia began to increase. This happened around 1890 when the Russian railway network was extended and foreign investment in industry increased. When the industries in Russia increased, many people began to move to the industrial areas to work in the industries. During this time, the government in Russia supervised the factories in Russia. The reason why the government supervised the industries or the factories in Russia was to make sure that minimum wages and limited hours of work were made available to the workers. In spite of the government being in charge of the factories, the inspectors of the factories did not follow these rules, and many a times the workers had to work for many hours a day, and they were paid very little. In craft workshops, like maybe in carpentry shops or in iron industries, the workers would work for even 15 hours a day. These workers worked in the factories and lived in very small rooms or in dormitories. So we know that the living condition of these workers was very bad. Among the workers themselves, there were a lot of differences. Some of them considered themselves to be more superior than the others. The metal workers considered themselves to be aristocratic. Aristocratic means those who come from superior families, or they considered working with metals as higher than those who worked in other craft workshops. The reason why these metal workers considered themselves to be more superior was because this occupation of working with metals demanded more training and skill. Besides men, even women worked in the factories in Russia. Almost 31% of the women in Russia worked in the factories. But these women who worked in the factories were paid very little. Different people worked in different crafts workshops in Russia, and the division among the workers was shown in their dress and manners. That means different skills or different crafts. People who worked in different workshops wore a particular kind of a dress, and depending on the type of dress that they wore, people would recognize them as particular kind of workers. Many a times these workers who worked in the craft workshops were not happy with their owners or the employers, and so they went on a strike. So this was the condition of the industries and the workers in the industries in Russia before the revolution. Since the workers in Russia were not happy, in 1898 the Social Democratic Workers' Party was founded by the socialists. Socialists were those who believed that property should be equally distributed among all the people rather than it being in the hands of a few. The workers in Russia who preferred socialism formed the Social Democratic Workers' Party. This party published their own newspapers, mobilized workers, and organized strikes to get their rights. The people in Russia felt that they could achieve socialism more quickly than any other country because in Russia they practiced the method of dividing land periodically, so this made them natural socialists. So thus the people in Russia were getting ready to start a revolution. It was the peasants who were more powerful than the workers in Russia, and they were the ones who were getting ready to fight this great revolution. The peasants in Russia also formed a party known as the Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1900. This party struggled for the rights of the peasants and demanded that the land which was in the hands of the nobles be transferred to the peasants. During this time, The Social Democrats disagreed with the social revolutionaries about the peasants. A political leader in Russia by the name of Vladimir Lenin was against the Social Revolutionary Party. He said that the peasants in Russia were not united. He also said that some of the peasants were poor and some were very rich. He said that some worked as laborers while others were capitalists. Capitalist means they were very rich, they owned big lands. So he said that all of them could not be a part of the socialist movement. During this time, Lenin formed his own party known as the Bolshevik Party in Russia. Besides the Bolsheviks, there was another party in Russia known as the Menshevik Party. This party was also a part of the Social Democratic Workers' Party. The Menshevik Party was a party that was open to all people, not like the Bolsheviks, who only allowed those who were disciplined and only a particular type of people were allowed to be members of the Bolshevik Party. Let us now move on to another short unit entitled A Turbulent Time, the 1905 Revolution in Russia. In 1905, the people in Russia were getting more and more agitated. Agitative means they were fighting for their rights. The people in Russia during this time demanded for a constitution for Russia. You remember I spoke to you about the liberals, the radicals, and the conservatives in Russia. Now it were the liberals who demanded for a constitution in Russia. As the people were demanding for a constitution in Russia, during this time there were a lot of other problems that the people were facing. At this time, the prices of essential goods, you know what are essential goods? Things like rice, wheat, bread, etc. These are essential goods. The prices of these essential goods rose. Rose means they became expensive. The wages of the workers declined by 20%, means the workers got a very less salary. Since their salaries became less, they couldn't afford to buy the expensive goods. Since the workers were going through a very troublesome time, the number of workers' associations increased. These associations fought for the rights of workers. Since the workers joined these associations, many of them were dismissed from work. Dismissed means they were thrown out from their jobs. When some of the workers were dismissed from their jobs, the others went on a strike. Those who went on a strike demanded for reduction in the working day. Reduction in the working day means they demanded that the work hours should be less, that is 8 hours a day and not more than 8 hours. They also demanded for an increase in the wage. Wage means increase in the salaries, and also an improvement in the working conditions. When these workers went on a strike, they were led by a very important person named Father Gapin. When Father Gapin led the workers' strike, they went in a procession marching to the Winter Palace where the Tsar lived. When the workers reached the Winter Palace, the Tsar's soldiers came out and attacked the workers. They killed many workers and several of them were wounded. Now, this incident took place on a Sunday in 1905 in Russia, and since it took place on a Sunday, it came to be known as the Bloody Sunday in Russia. When the other people came to know about this drastic incident that took place in front of the Tsar's palace, the people in Russia got very angry. This led to several strikes all over the country. The universities closed down. The doctors, engineers, lawyers, and other middle class workers established the Union of Workers and demanded a constituent assembly for Russia. While the people in Russia were still demanding for a constitution for Russia, the First World War began in Europe. So, we will now study the First World War and the Russian Empire. You all know that the First World War broke out in Europe in 1914 between two European alliances. Two European alliances means two groups of European countries. One group comprised of Germany, Austria and Turkey. This group was known as the Central Powers. And the other group that was fighting the First World War comprised of France, Britain and Russia, and they were known as the Triple Alliance. Russia took active part in the First World War. The First World War was fought both outside Europe as well as in Europe. Initially, the people of Russia took great interest in the First World War and supported the Tsar. But later on, when the Tsar refused to consult the people, slowly the people also stopped supporting the Tsar. When the Tsar lost the support of the people, it was very easy for Germany and Austria to defeat Russia. When the Russians were defeated in the First World War in 1916, they retrieved from the war by destroying crops and buildings to prevent the enemy from leaving the land. Now, the enemies during this time were Germany and Austria. There was a lot of damage in Russia during this time, and so Russia decided to leave the First World War. At the same time, the people of Russia also were not happy with the rule of the Tsar. So soon after Russia was defeated in the First World War, immediately in 1917, the Russian Revolution broke out in Russia.